So let's take this flow and start from the sound source, specifically microphones, and we'll look at what the right type of mic is for the job and how to position them. So vocal mics, they're pretty easy to use. Just get them as close to the sound source, which is your mouth, as possible. Rest it on your chin if possible. If it's a lav mic, get it as high as you can, probably about here. Now, if it's head worn, get it really snug against your cheek. All of these suggestions are pretty self-explanatory, but let's tackle the big one, and that is drums.
So here's what a typical drum kit looks like. We have our kick drum, snare drum, hi-hat, toms, and our overhead cymbals, our ride and our crash cymbals. And then let's go through each element in our drum kit and look at the kind of usual suspects in terms of what types of mics we use for each of these applications. We'll start off with a kick drum. So one to start off would be the Shure Beta 52. Also the Beta 91 is a good example. The perennial AKG D12, been around for a long time, and then the Audix D6. And then the EV RE20 or the PL20, they're both, they're actually coincidentally kind of used for voiceovers quite often, but they can be really used well in kick drums as well. Then moving on to our snare drums, we typically mic from the top of the snare drum. If you like, you can get some of the snap from the snares underneath the snare drum by miking underneath that as well. And boy, can you guess what the first one would be? That would be the Shure SM57. I'd like $1 for every time a Shure 57 has been placed over a snare drum. But here's some other examples. We have a Beta 56A, and an Audix i5 is a good bet as well. Then moving on to our hi-hats, an Audix SCX1HC, the Neumann KM185, and the Shure SM81 are all good choices. Now going on to our toms here, we can go with the Audix D2, the Shure Beta 98As, the Shure Beta 56As, or the Sennheiser 421 that's been used on toms for a very long time. It's a great example. And then moving on to our overheads, the Shure SM81, the Sennheiser E416, and the Audix ADX51. They're all good choices right here. Now, in a perfect world, you better get you'd get the most expensive and the best mic for each of these. I understand that that might not be plausible in your kind of situation. So let's have a look at some of the kits that are available, and there's a few that are made, and I would kind of categorize them in the good, better, best. And in terms of if you wanted to get kind of an entry level, the Samson would be a good choice, then the Shure, and then if you want to get into really nice setups, the Audix would be a great choice there as well. So let's go ahead and look at exactly how you mic up all of these on a drum kit. Most drummers cut out a hole in the front head and place some dampening material inside the shell to prevent ringing and give the kick kind of a nice thud to it. Place the kick drum mic inside the shell pointing towards the beater. In terms of snare drums, place your mic right at the edge pointing down at the head at about 2 inches from the edge. Make sure that the mic is out of the way, enough so that the drummer doesn't accidentally hit it from time to time. You can get away with just a single mic on the top of the snare, but also another one underneath it pointing up at the snares is a great way to capture the snap and buzz of those snares. Listen to just the top, then just the bottom, and now I'll blend between the two. The hi-hat mic should be placed about 2 or 3 inches from the hi-hats, angled in a way to prevent spill from other instruments, most notably the snare drum. The toms are mic'd in basically the same way as the snares, pointing down about 2 inches from the rim. You can move inwards towards the center of the head for a boomier sound. And finally, overheads are placed, they're placed overhead. And because the ride and the bell of the ride are quieter than the crash cymbal, then I would normally angle the right overhead in a little just to favor that ride. If any of you are lucky enough to have a Hammond organ going through a Leslie cabinet, here's how to mic it up. Now, a Leslie cabinet, as you can see, there's a couple of different parts. There's a low end, and we'll concentrate on that. Mic that up using a mic that you'd normally use for a kick drum application, so it can capture that low energy coming out of the bottom end of that Leslie cabinet. On the top end of your Leslie cabinet, you have a rotating horn. So you definitely, if you can, set that up so that you can capture that spread by a pair of microphones. And if you want to think of an application, anything you'd normally use in drum overheads, I would definitely suggest using condenser mics up there if you can, and spread them apart. And then also back in the console, if you can spread them a little apart in terms of the panning, you'll get a great result, and you'll be able to feel that Doppler effect coming off of that top rotating horn. Now, in terms of pianos, normally you would use, there are a number of piano miking systems like Earthworks and things like that, but a typical situation is get a couple of condenser microphones and place them, one to cover the low strings and the other one to cover the mid and high strings.
Now, in terms of miking up your acoustic string instruments like guitars, mandolins, and violin, many of these instruments will have great pickups or mics built in. Some have pickups built right in the bridges, others have small mics built in. Now, obviously, a great benefit is this: you just plug and play, just plug them into a DI box and send them on through to your console. And another benefit is that your performer doesn't have to hover around a static microphone. And that doesn't mean that we're talking about your fiddle player stage diving into the third row. I'm just talking about just natural movements that a performer will have, against a static microphone. That can dramatically change the volume and, more importantly, the tone of your source. Because a cardioid pattern microphone like this picks up dramatically more low end the closer you get to it. It's called the proximity effect, and can be used for effect if you want a thunderous, Barry White tone to your voice. Just eat the mic, get right up here. Obviously this isn't plugged in, I'm speaking through here, but you'll get a lot more low end there. But in terms of mic choices, if you did want to mic up an acoustic or a mandolin or a violin, I'd probably go with a condenser mic if you can. It's not the end of the world if you use whatever you have with it, some sort of dynamic microphone here, but you'll enjoy a lot more top end and clarity if you use a condenser. So aim at about 6 to 12 inches away, about half the way down the length of the string, and you can angle it a little bit more towards the sound hole on an acoustic instrument if you want to accentuate a little bit more low end there.